Hey y'all, who dat, and welcome in. I am Jeff Nowak. This is a midweek edition of the Inside Black and Gold podcast, coming at you solo, the only podcast where you get me talking at you for 45 minutes to an hour, 3 times a week. And if you're not into that, then I don't know why you're listening. Either way, that's my sales pitch. It wasn't a very good one, but thanks everyone for being here. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that. If you are watching on YouTube, ring the bell, do whatever. If you listen to this on your podcast player, wherever it is, make sure to rate, subscribe, hit the review, say something on the review, tell me how you feel. But either way, let's get into the podcast. Going to be a lot of sound thrown at you. We have some interesting interviews I want to get to. This first segment is going to be the injury report. We're going to break it down. It's a shorter one, which is nice, but there are still a few topics that I want to get into. One genuinely concerning injury, and a few others that are going to be interesting to watch. We'll get into that. Second segment, I want to hear from Mickey Loomis. I know, not the most popular guy in the world or in the New Orleans sports world right now, but I do want to hear from him. He was on WWL this week. He had some interesting things to say, so we'll get into it. Also want to hear from John Benton. He also was on WWL this week. Thought he had some interesting comments to make about Trevor Penning specifically, a guy who's been raked over the coals a lot throughout his career, but he's actually in the headlines for good things this week because I know he's playing pretty well right now. A couple people have said he had his best game of probably his career. So that's definitely something to build on. So we'll talk about that. Final segment, I want to get into a segment that I'm going to call 3 points. It's something that I'm going to try out. We'll see if it lands. We'll see if it doesn't, whatever. If it doesn't work, we'll do something else. But I think it's just going to be a good way to kind of hit on a few topics midweek without kind of trying to blow it all out into its own segment. Like a couple quick notes, or I say several quick notes, just that I think are worth talking about, worth getting on record. And today I want to talk about Kevin Austin, for example. Tyrann Mathieu, I have one note from something he did in that last game, and I asked him about it today, and he had a really good answer. So I want to get into that. And then, Saints defensive backs, where are they? How do we feel about it? We'll get into that as well. So all of that. But first, like I said, back to the injury report, which, again, it's a good thing because there's only 9 names listed on it. Now, that may sound like a lot, but when you consider we were looking at 17 bodies on the injury report for some weeks earlier in the season, and we had like 5 or 6 or 7 guys who were DMPs, right? In this injury report, there's only 3 DMPs, and we'll get to the first 2 right now because they're not particularly much. There's not a ton to talk about with them. And the first is guard center Lucas Patrick dealing with an ankle injury. He was a DMP. He's a guy that, I'm not going to read a little too much into this other than the fact that he hasn't played in a little while. I think he could probably play with limited practice, so we'll have to wait and see. I don't think you see a DMP on Wednesday for him and rule him out. That said, he's been dealing with injuries, so I'm not going to bank on him playing either. The other guy who I think this DMP is pretty telling that he's probably not going to be out there is Jamal Williams, still dealing with that groin injury. He actually re-aggravated it last week during practice, and that kept him out. So, I'm kind of at the end of my rope with Jamal. I don't think he's been particularly productive when he's been in there, and now he's dealing with injuries. I personally, I would rather see young guys play. I think we're at a point in the season where devoting snaps to a veteran that isn't really producing just doesn't. What does it do for you? What does it do for you? Right? I want to see who's part of the future. And I don't see Jamal, whether he's part of this story this season, I don't see him as part of the story beyond this season, whatever that turns into. So, hey, I'm on record saying give the snaps to Jordan Mims, give the snaps to Kendre Miller when he gets back in a couple weeks. Jamal, I appreciate you. I appreciate all you've done. Let's just call it what it is. Okay? Anyway, so those are 2 guys that did not practice on Wednesday. The other DMP is Pete Werner, but I'm going to put a pin in that for now, get back to it at the end because there's some other things I want to get to quickly before we dive a little bit more into that topic. And so a couple other guys that were limited today in practice, I don't see it as particularly concerning. Safety JT Gray dealing with a hip issue. Safety Jordan Howden dealing with a shoulder issue. Jordan actually went out during the win over the Falcons, came back with a shoulder harness, played through that injury. So I think you're going to see the same thing this week. I don't think either of those guys is really in danger of missing the game. So we don't need to talk a ton more about it. Will Harris is also back. Didn't show up on the injury report this week, so that's a good sign. I thought they looked a lot better with Will Harris in there. So, it's nice to see this Saints team kind of becoming more whole and looking more like the Saints team we saw in the beginning of the season, where we were actually a little confident about what they could do. So that's going to be something to keep watching. Anyway, I expect both those safeties to be active. A couple other guys returned to practice. Both were limited. Cornerback Kool-Aid McKinstry dealing with that hamstring injury. Wide receiver Cedric Wilson Jr. dealing with a shoulder injury. Let's get to Kool-Aid first. Now, Kool-Aid is a guy that would be starting right now 100% if he was healthy, and that's frustrating because we haven't been able to see him out there. Marshawn Lattimore is gone. Paulson Adebo's on IR. I want to see what you have in Alontae Taylor and Kool-Aid McKinstry. Well, so far it's just been Alontae Taylor and Shamar John-Charles. And as nicely as I think Shamar has shown in these games, I want to see Kool-Aid. I want to see what I have in Kool-Aid McKinstry. Now, he suffered that hamstring injury ahead of the Panthers game. It was a midweek practice injury. We've seen way too many of those. The Saints have made some adjustments to try to mitigate the soft tissue injuries or these activation periods and all that. We'll talk about it. But it's just a thing, right? It's a thing that's happened too much. And so we'll see. It's good news to see him back out there. Darren Rizzi said today he's on track to play. We'll have to see how the rest of this week goes, but that's a good sign. I expect if he's healthy, he will take that spot across from Alontae Taylor because, again, I want to see what I have in young players. You're still trying to win games. But when you're 3-7, you cannot make the excuse that, we don't know what we're going to get. We need to see what we have in young players. No question. Cedric Wilson Jr., he suffered a shoulder injury against the Panthers, went out, got x-rays on that shoulder, came back and finished the game, then missed last week with the same shoulder injury. It'd be good to get him back out there. I know Cedric hasn't been the most productive player in the world, but he is still a veteran player. He's a guy what he can do. You trust him in the offense. He's been there since day one, and you just don't have a ton of those guys right now. So it'll be good to get him back out there. Two other guys, as we mentioned, both linebackers. One of them is Pete Werner, but let's get to Nephi Sewell first because his situation is more of a note than anything else. He has been a full participant in practice each of the last 2 weeks. He's still on injured reserve. So the question becomes, what do you do with Nephi Sewell? Do you cut somebody? Because if you don't add him back to the active roster this week, he is done for the year. I do somewhat wonder if the winds have shifted to some extent with Dennis Allen not being here and was bringing Nephi back a Dennis Allen thing. Because if it was, maybe you are content with just letting him play out the rest of the season on IR. He'll still get paid. He'll still get his checks. But we'll have to see because if you bring him back, you're going to have to cut somebody. And who's that going to be? You already have, I want to say, 7 linebackers on the roster. So you're going to cut a Jalen Ford. The guy who's been here, guy who's been playing, a DeMarco Jackson, a special teams contributor who's gotten defensive snaps throughout the course of the season. Anthony Ordry, same situation, right? Are you going to cut a defensive back? Are you going to cut a Rico Payton? Going back to the beginning, do you revert Jamal Williams to IR and free up a roster spot that way? I don't know. Nephi's a guy that I could understand if they put him on the practice squad, but I do think you have to add him to the active roster first before you can do that. And so it's just something they'll have to figure out. Either way, it has to happen this week, one way or the other. Either you add him to the active roster or he's done for the year. So just something to keep in mind. I know the defense seems to like Nephi. They didn't have to keep him around at all. They could have cut him. They kept him around. So my read would be that they want him. They want to bring him back. So we'll just have to see how they handle it. But final guy on the injury report, Mr. Peter Werner. A guy who has missed time already this year with a hamstring injury that he, tweaked in practice, the final practice of the week, a walkthrough ahead of the Chiefs game. Missed multiple weeks, came back, has looked very, very good in his time back to the point that I think he might be the Saints' best defensive player right now. You go and you watch that game, all you have to do is get to the first play of the game, the first play of Saints Falcons, and if he doesn't make a shoestring tackle on Bijan Robinson, the first play of that game for the Falcons might have been a 70-yard touchdown. I am not kidding. Go and watch it. If you have the All-22, go and watch it and watch. There's no one else. He didn't make this play. He gets up and makes it. And he's just been everywhere for this Saints defense. And so you really want him out there. He's dealing with a hand injury. He went out late against the Falcons. did not play the rest of the game. Like, he went back to the locker room, did not return for the Saints' final defensive possession. They got it done without him, which I was very worried when you like combine that with the Alvin Kamara drop. It just did not look like it was going to go the Saints' way. It did. But he's dealing with a hand injury. Here's what Darren Rizzi had to say about the injury when he was asked on Wednesday.
Yeah, we're trying to figure out, obviously he's dealing with that hand thing right now, so we're trying to figure out what his, we kept him out today. But everything's still on the table right now, including tomorrow and this weekend and all that. So, sometimes with those hand stuff, you got to figure out the best scenario for, there's all kinds of different things with how Willie Gay was dealing with the same type of deal. So we'll kind of see how that goes. So that's going to be more of a day-to-day thing to see if we can get him ready for the weekend. So I know mentally he certainly wants to play. So physically, if he can, he will.
Yeah, so when you hear it compared to Willie Gay's injury, which ironically also occurred against the Falcons, that's not particularly confidence-inspiring because that injury cost Willie Gay multiple games. He didn't return against the Falcons, didn't play against the Chiefs the next week. I don't think Pete had to have surgery, but it does seem to be kind of a similar hand issue that he is dealing with. He was wearing like a brace that did not look dissimilar to the type of brace Willie was wearing when he came back from that injury. So we'll have to see. Pete was out there at practice. It was a little confusing when you look at the practice participation tweets versus the practice participation report, because all we're reporting on is attendance. And he was out there wearing a helmet in full uniform, which is kind of unusual for a player who was listed as a DMP. That's why I assumed he had practiced initially, but apparently he got held out. It sounds, based on what Darren said, like Pete wants to play. And I think it's going to come down to what the doctors say. So we'll have to see. And again, I think Pete makes a big difference for this team on defense. So it's going to be something to watch. But okay, that's the injury report going into week 11, a matchup with the Cleveland Browns and the Fighting Jameis Winstons. We're not going to talk about Jameis today, but we are going to have plenty about Jameis in Friday's episode. So like I said, we'll get more on Erik McCoy. We'll get more on Jameis. We'll do a lot more with that, but we're going to wrap up this segment. We're going to come back and we're going to hear from Mr. Mickey Loomis and what he had to say about the Darren Rizzi experience, all that good stuff on WWL. Also hear from John Bent. We're going to talk about Trevor Penning and a good bit more. This is Inside Black and Gold. I am Jeff Nowak. Subscribe if you haven't. Otherwise, stick around. We'll be right back. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak coming at you solo for this midweek episode. And midweek means we have a Mickey Loomis interview to react to. He comes on WWL every Tuesday, talks to Mike Hoss. Usually says at least one thing that drives people nuts. But I was curious. I was curious when he came on how he would spin the Darren Rizzi situation, like how he would react to it. Because I do think it's interesting, because if you're the GM and you hire a coach and you stand by a coach and you go into your post-game press conference with a note card that says, hey, Chuck Noll, Bill Belichick, Tom Landry, these guys struggle to start their careers. And I expect Dennis to do similar things. I think he's a good coach, and I think he's going to figure it out. Then midway through the season, you kind of get your hand forced and have to fire the guy. So, okay, let's do that, right? Now you bring in an interim head coach. You pick the obvious choice. You go with Darren Rizzi and you say, okay, let's do this thing. Suddenly everyone's happy. Suddenly everything's going well, and I'm the GM and I'm like, well, but this wasn't me. This wasn't my call, and so that's got to be some mixed feelings there, because you want to be able to say, hey, I did something right, but in this case, it didn't. It wasn't really. It was, and so we'll see how the rest of this goes. But when I play this next clip, understand that, like, I do think there's some of that. I do think there is some of that. And let's just play it. Let's hear. This is what Mickey had to say when Mike Hoss asked him about, hey, how did this week go? How do you feel this all looked? What is your opinion of it? Yada, yada, yada. Let's hear it.
Look, I think this, when you have a midseason change, and this goes for any team, you're going to get a little bump in emotion, right? And I thought Rizzi did a great job of accentuating that, of having some tangible things that were different relative to the week, the preparation. I think he stated some things verbally that needed to be stated. Talked a lot about accountability and being all in and having a different mindset for the week and accentuating that. Yeah, and I think most importantly, our team responded to that this week. And look, we got some guys back as well that made a difference and ended up with a win and a close game.
Yeah, so let's unpack that, right? Like I do think this, like the reaction, I tweeted that quote and people kind of went nuts about it immediately. I do think it is like a scenario where people are mad at Mickey. The people aren't huge fans of Mickey right now. And so we're dissecting, John O'Barnes had a good line, which is like, they're dissecting this nothing burger of a quote like it's a pig in biology class. And I agree with him, which if you don't follow John, go follow John. He's hilarious. But it's just funny because like, if this was a scenario where everyone was thrilled with Mickey, no one would have even like noticed this quote. They would have been like, yeah, okay, whatever. Because they're looking for reasons to be mad at him. They're like, how dare you say it was only a little boost of energy? It was a huge boost of energy. And I get it, but at the same time, like, I don't think that's an unfair way to characterize what all happened. And my question was whether he was going to acknowledge the energy boost at all. And he did, which in and of itself kind of gives you the admission that like, yeah, this is better. This is working better. And some of the changes he made, they definitely worked. There were some that were tangible. There were some that were a little more superficial, but everyone bought into, and that's where you go. And I actually, generally speaking, I think that we are overplaying the energy boost part of it a little bit, right? Like one of the reasons that you shouldn't expect Mickey to go on there and be like, hey, these guys are playing like I've never seen before. They care now. Like he's not going to do that for the same reason the players aren't going to do that, because the players weren't tanking. The players weren't selling. They just weren't winning. Things weren't working, but they were still out there trying. They were still out there giving it everything they had. You just weren't getting the best out of them. And so I don't know. I find it difficult to get super worked up about that quote when in reality, that's what happened. You made this change. Guys kind of locked in a little bit. You made these tweaks to practice. You made the change to the locker room. You did all these things that everyone kind of bought into. And like the idea that's like, oh, this is a massively different team. It's not really. We watched that pretty much that exact same game play out 4 different times this year. We saw it in week 3 against the Eagles, a little different because of the lack of scoring in that game. We watched it in week 4 against the Falcons. We watched it in week 9 against the Panthers. And then we watched it in week 10 against the Falcons, right? These are all games that, there was a defensive struggle for a good bit of it. Both teams kind of had their issues on offense. None of these games were high scoring. None of these games were high flying. They were kind of grinded out. Someone needs to finish this game type of game. And in the first 3, you didn't have the juice to finish it. In that one, you did. And you played in such a way that you're like, okay, this is how we win a game. This is how you learn how to win a game. And the difference between winning that game and losing that game isn't massive. The difference is, okay, who's got that extra juice at the end? And that's not a massive difference, but it's a significant difference. Like we're playing semantics here to argue like, oh, was it a big energy boost or was it a little energy boost? At the end of the day, it was the energy boost that was needed. So I don't know, like Mickey's going to have to reckon with this one way or the other. I think, yeah, he's going to slow play it a little bit. I don't know. I'm not going to get mad about that quote. Either way, that's what he said. Now, you want to get mad about something. There was a little more justifiable anger out of this interview as well. He was asked about the wide receiver room, and he gave an answer that, I didn't even tweet the whole answer. I did tweet the quote that mattered. So this is what he said when he was asked about Marquez Valdes-Scantling, the wide receivers, and some of these big plays that occurred throughout the game.
Yeah, look, I'm guessing that most of our fans didn't know who Marquez was before the game. They certainly do now. He made 3 huge plays, really, because he had 2 explosive plays and then the touchdown. I thought Kevin Austin made a couple of nice plays in the game, 2 big catches for first downs in critical situations. just a lot of guys stepped up. We had some guys on defense as well. Ugo, who's been here and been a good player for us, has had the opportunity to play and made a lot of nice plays. Shamar, so we've just had some guys that stepped in and did their job. And then we had some guys that we've had that have been playing that just did a little bit more. And that's what it takes.
Yeah. So like that quote, in part, it's like, hey, he kind of bridged from the wide receivers to guys that I agree should be noted as playing very well. Ugo Amadi, Shamar John Charles, guys like that. Kevin Austin. But the quote that everyone's going to hinge on, and this was a little of a tone-deaf quote for sure. He said, "I'm guessing that most of our fans didn't know who Marquez was before the game. They certainly do now." And I can't blame people for getting annoyed about that one, because it's like, wait, what? You don't think we know who Marquez Valdez-Scantling is? You're like, yeah, sure, he's not a perennial Pro Bowler. We did catch a touchdown in the Super Bowl last year. Like, we know who Marquez Valdez-Scantling is. I almost wonder, because here's the thing with Mickey, he goes into those interviews with lines loaded up. He does. He does. And I almost wonder if he intended to say that about Kevin Austin, which is because it's what Darren Rizzi said about Kevin Austin basically in his postgame. Which, yeah, I don't think most Saints fans had any idea who Kevin Austin was, in part because they weren't at training camp. And if you're at training camp, you would have seen Kevin Austin out there and you would have had an idea. In this case, it was like, oh, this guy's been on the practice squad all year. Let's see what he's got. Marquez Valdez-Scantling, not so much. But yeah, that one I can get on board with the frustration a little bit more. And it's funny because it's like, if all he said was a lot instead of most, I think you could get away with that quote. I also do wonder, and don't get me wrong when I say this, I do wonder if he's right in the sense of, like, a lot of times I think I underestimate, and I think a lot of people who are super engaged with the team underestimate just how big the percentages of people who are big Saints fans but only watch the Saints. I think that's a much higher number than the super engaged portion of Saints fans or Saints Twitter, whatever, would guess it is, right? Because it's still a lot of Saints fans out there, but I only hear from a very small percentage of them. And here's the thing. If you're hearing me say this right now, count yourself among the super engaged Saints fans, because you would have to be a pretty super engaged Saints fan to want to listen to a midweek podcast where I talk about injury reports and a Mickey Loomis interview. That said, what would you consider the group of people who is listening to Mickey Loomis talk on an interview on a Tuesday at 7 p.m.? Those are the engaged fans. So, yeah, and one of my bigger gripes about Mickey is I just think he's tone deaf a little bit to the fans and what the fans just like. How you need to talk to a fan? I need Mickey to just go into the stands at a game and just talk to regular human people for a minute, because like that's the type of quote. Just like, don't say stuff like that. What are you doing, man? Like, what are you doing? Anyway, not a fan of that quote. But I am a fan of the idea that, like, yeah, these guys showed up and they delivered, and they deserve credit for that, even if you don't know some of these guys' names. We'll talk more about Kevin Austin at the bottom, but yeah, it's the whole thing. It's a whole thing. Final quote from Mickey I want to get into, and it is Mickey talking about Trevor Penning, who was asked about Trevor Penning's growth. And I think he did actually give a good balanced answer to this question, and we'll get into a little bit more on the back end.
Yeah, well, I think when you look at, I always try to look at what are the positive things that have happened during the course of a season, even when we're, 3-7. And I think one of the positives is, man, I can see the development of a really good offensive line down the road. We've got a rookie left tackle who's done some good things. We've got, I know we've got a top flight center in Erik McCoy when he's available. We've got a developmental guard left guard in Nick Saldiveri. I think Lucas Patrick has played well when he's been available. Caesar's a really solid player, and the arrow's up on him. And then Trevor has made a lot of progress this year. And each week, I feel like, our offensive line coaches, John Benton and Rick Dennison, they've spent a lot of time and effort working with Trevor, working on lots of fundamentals, as well as his mental preparation for the game. And you can see the progress. It's not there yet. It's not where we need it to be ultimately, but you can see the progress. And I feel like, and this is a better question for his coaches than me. I just feel like he's gaining confidence, and each week, we see plays and we see progress.
Yeah, and so Darren today said he if you asked offensive line coaches, he would say, "Hey, that was the best game we have seen Trevor Penning play this year, maybe in his career," and probably is true because his career before this year isn't that extensive. So you're talking about like one game his rookie season, or at least one start his rookie season, like 5, 6 starts his second season. So you're not exactly looking at it and saying, "Oh man, all of these great games he got benched in his second season." So there's not a ton to look at, but I do think that, this is a guy who was raked over the coals all preseason, was looked under a microscope. Every time he messed up, every time he missed a block, every time he ended up on the ground, he got clowned for it. And you got to give him credit. The guy's worked, right? And I still think, and Mickey's right, he's not where he needs to be at the end of the day, but he is along that path to a guy that you could see being your long-term starter at right tackle. And if he is that, then suddenly that 2022 draft doesn't look nearly as sketchy from a talent perspective. Now, obviously, Chris Olave's health status is an issue. But, if you want to look at the PFF grades, and I don't expect a lot of people to go in and watch every Trevor Penning clip and dissect the form. Honestly, more people than should do that. But Trevor Penning, PFF, got a 92.8 PFF grade. That's number one on the team that week. 94.7 run blocking grade. Now, I did tweet a clip of Trevor putting Matt Judon into the dirt, and that's always nice to see. He had 27 pass blocking reps. He allowed 1 pressure, no sacks. That's a very good game for any offensive tackle. And I think some people misunderstand how PFF grades work. They are graded on a 0 to 100 scale across the board. It's not like relative to that game. I saw some people say, "Oh, but what about the rest of the offensive tackles?" That was the number one grade among all offensive tackles. And it's not graded just on that game. It is graded on a standing scale of what good offensive line play is and what isn't. So that's cool to see. And just to tie that off, here's John Benton answering the same question this week about Trevor.
I'm really pretty impressed with Trevor from that standpoint. I think he always needed continuous time on task, which he struggled due to injuries in his past and that type of thing, but he's stuck with it, and it's showing in his play now. He's playing with a lot more confidence, and I think he's starting to enjoy the game a little bit.
And so, confidence is key. And I think that was when I was watching Trevor in the preseason, my biggest concern was that he looked like a guy who was going out there waiting to find out how he was going to get beat on the next rep. Like, he didn't look like a guy who felt like, I'm going to win this rep. I'm going to do it. He looked like a guy who was like, I'm going to lose it. I'm just not sure how yet. And to me, that's the biggest difference. And, I don't know where things go for him. I don't know if he is your long-term right tackle, what you do beyond this season. If you go into the draft and like a star offensive tackle falls into your lap, I'm not saying you don't draft him, but what I am saying is you're going to go into that draft, and I think based on what you've seen this season, you can feel comfortable drafting the best player available. You don't have to draft a tackle because you're desperate to draft a tackle. And that was the case this past season, because at that time, you weren't sure if you had a single tackle. You weren't sure if you had your right or left tackle. Now, and this is what Mickey said, and you can see kind of the fringes of a very strong offensive line group forming when you really look at it. Because if you can say, hey, Trevor's a guy that we feel like is going to develop, and he's going into year 4, you're going to have to make a decision on that 5th-year option. I'd be surprised if they pick it up, just because a 5th-year option for an offensive tackle is going to be crazy, when you could probably just sign him to an extension for a much more reasonable number if you wanted to do that. Either way, if you go into the next season, you feel like, hey, we have our right tackle. We feel good about it. We're going to keep developing him. We feel good about our left tackle, Talaiasi Fuaga. We really like him. We think we have the best center, and Cesar Ruiz said this. We feel like we have the best center in the NFL. Cesar Ruiz, right guard. I mean, I don't know where you'd rank Cesar Ruiz among the NFL, among right guards in the NFL, but he's certainly a starting caliber right guard and a pretty solid one at that. So then you're looking at and saying, man, we have 4 of our 5 offensive line spots sewed up. That's a good feeling. And we just got to find a left guard. Maybe draft a guard in the second round and build him up. Maybe Nick Saldiveri develops, and then we can build up the depth behind it so that when one of our offensive linemen go down, we don't have just this line of people trying to be like, who's good enough to play at the NFL level? Like, you can start to build up quality depth and develop guys behind your starting offensive line so that you can actually survive some of these injuries. When you look at, okay, how does this team kind of make it back? How do you build back to a team that should feel like, hey, we have a chance to go win a Super Bowl? It's got to be through the lines. And Trevor Penning being a serviceable player who can develop into a maybe quality starter at some point in his career, that's a really positive thing. So I'm happy about it. I'm glad that Trevor is getting some credit these days, and we'll see where it goes from here. But either way, let's wrap up that segment. Again, this is Inside Black and Gold. I am Jeff Nowak. We're going to come back. We're going to hit 3 points. Some things that have been kind of digging into my brain like a brain worm. No one's going to get that reference. I'm not going to make it. Either way, we're going to do it. This is Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. Stick around. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold. I am Jeff Nowak, and we're going to go into what I'm going to refer to in this segment as 3 points, not a field goal, just 3 points. Kind of more like a jump shot than a field goal. Either way, we're not talking about kickers. We are talking about 3 things that have been catching my eye over the last few weeks, this week, whatever. And so we're just going to dive right in because this podcast has been going on for a while. We're going to talk about, I think Kevin Austin deserves a roster spot. He certainly deserves to get his practice squad call-ups maxed out. And I think he deserves to start. And whatever you want to call that, whatever you want to call starting at the wide receiver position, right? Like, obviously MVS is going to be in that equation. Mason Tipton's going to be in that equation. I've kind of been disappointed with what we've seen out of Mason Tipton. Like, let's be real. He's been here all season. He has not made an impact. He's made a few catches here and there, but he hasn't made any big catches. Like, the 2 catches Kevin Austin made in that game were more impactful than any of the 14 or so catches Mason Tipton has made to this point in his career. He and Derek Carr just don't seem to be on the same page at all in terms of where he needs to be or where Derek needs to throw it or whatever side you want to blame for that. It's not working out. And so far, Kevin Austin, 2 targets, 2 catches, 36 yards, both went for first downs. Both were pretty nice catches, right? The first one was one of the more impressive catches I've seen any Saints wide receiver make in terms of difficulty this year. The second one, we talked about this on Monday, he just settled into a zone, made the grab, turned up field, and went. And I asked, and one thing Darren Rizzi said after the game that caught my attention was that apparently veteran players had actually gone up to him and lobbied that Kevin deserves a chance because they've seen how hard he's been working. And I asked Derek Carr about that in today's press conference, and this is what he said.
Riz said after the game, Kevin Austin, that some veteran players would actually come up to him and ask, hey, could we give this guy a chance? What is it about Kevin that kind of has endeared himself in that way?
He since day one, his work ethic's been unbelievable. Like, he literally, we probably all know somebody like this where they just come in every day, they're quiet, but you know that all of their work is going to get done at a high level, at a high effort, and no one's going to praise them. No one's even gonna, you're just thankful that they're there, And, you sit back and you look, you're like, man, that guy deserves an opportunity, or that individual deserves an opportunity, And you look at Kevin, and I've loved him since the training camp, all off season. We ran a crazy 2-minute drill, and I remember I had to throw like this 40-yard, on the sideline. And as I'm throwing it, I'm like, oh, that's not Chris, And Kevin goes up and makes the play and toe taps, and we end up winning the drill and things like that. And I just remember from that moment, I was like, man, I trust this guy. And then in the preseason, he was a guy that was, even if he didn't get the ball, you watch him run his routes, you're like, wow, it's impressive. Some of the things he's doing, seeing coverage. And so he's a guy that he's young, he's raw, but I think that he can grow. When you look at him, he looks like an NFL receiver, and he works like one too. So I'm excited to see his growth and where he can go because he's definitely put the work in. I'll say it that way.
Yeah, and I mean, that's where you have it. Like, he's been here since training camp. It's not like one of the reasons Derek probably looks comfortable throwing to him is because he's thrown to him since training camp. And you could say that was true with Mason, but Mason missed a good chunk of training camp. So, I just think there's a lot of reasons that I want to see Kevin get a shot. One of them, if you go back and watch that Alvin Kamara screenplay, watch Kevin Austin. And I'll tweet this clip in the morning. I didn't tweet it. And I tweeted the film notes. I didn't tweet that one, but I'll tweet this clip in the morning. If you watch Kevin Austin, he goes in motion, goes downfield, hits a block, play gets by him. You could very easily at that point as a wide receiver say like, all right, good luck. Wave him on, cheer, good job. Instead, he sprints downfield and finds another block. Like these are the type of things that you do to get playing time, right? So if you're making catches, and also like Derek Carr pointed out, and I agree, like he's not a guy out there like, maybe he can develop into an NFL. He's a NFL wide receiver. He looks like an NFL wide receiver already. He's got speed. He's got size. He's got hands. Clearly, we saw him make that catch. So all that is to say, I am a believer in if you produce, you get more time. If you produce, you get more chances. And right now, of all the wide receivers on the Saints roster, right, the guy I have seen actually make plays, well, two of them. There's two guys I have seen actually make plays in big moments. One, Kevin Austin. One is Marquez Valdes-Scantling. You obviously need more than that. There's going to be plenty of room to go around, but I think this season, the rest of the way, you should be giving this guy chances, and that's one of my points. All right. Point number 2, Tyrann Mathieu. I've done this before, and I'm going to do it again. Tyrann, he'll miss some tackles, right? Like I get it. He will be the first to tell you he hasn't played as good as he wants to or can this year. That's something he's got to work. That's something that he's aware of. Like he's missing too many tackles. I think he even says like I've got like 6 missed tackles over the last 2 weeks. Like that's got to be better. I think the Saints are asking him to make too many tackles, particularly on run plays. Like the run plays should not be getting to him at the second level. He shouldn't be asked to go up and make a tackle on Bijan Robinson. Right, your deep safety when your deep safety is the one who's missing tackles on the running back, it means that a whole lot of guys didn't do their job in front of him. So I'll give him a pass on that. But when you need a big play over the last 2-3 years in the secondary, he's more often than not the guy that makes it. And we all know that interception that he had in the fourth quarter, right? The huge interception where the Falcons kind of driving downfield and looked like they're getting the field goal range. He gets the ball. He kind of drove on a dig route, right? Well, when I was going through film, and you can find this on my Twitter account if you want to go look for it. When I was going through film, I noticed that in the first half, late in the first half, it's the drive that actually ended in the John Ridgeway block of Younghoe Koo. Tyrann almost had another one. And I asked him, and it looked very similar to his actual interception. So I asked him because I felt like he was just driving on dig routes, and he must have seen something. So I asked him in the locker room today, okay, was that the same key? Were you driving on the same key on that play? He said yes, and this is his answer.
I watch Kirk Cousins a lot, and after he gets done with his reads, he always tries to find the next. It's either the check down or the dig route, and so they're just trying to get a beat on it and make a play. I think if he'd kind of put it a little bit off the ground, I would probably caught that one too. And so,
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of reasons that Tyrann is probably a Hall of Famer. That Tyrann has 36 career interceptions. I think it was against the Eagles where we talked about his interception in the end zone of like they were they had plays in there just to mess with him because they knew he would be reading film and jumping their routes, and he still got an interception on it because he read what they were trying to do to fool him and didn't get fooled by it. And in this case, I mean, does everybody know that about Kirk Cousins? I tweeted that quote, and as I tweeted, I was like, "Will he be mad because I'm giving away secrets?" And I was like, "Yeah, but they already played him twice. Like that's not something like they're going to watch that on film and be like, he knows." But if anything, it's like, hey, other teams, guess what? You want to go beat Kirk Cousins? Here's a note, and when he gets through his reads, he's going to try to hit a dig, and if you jump it, you can get an interception. So it's just the things that, like, when a quarterback plays in the league for a long time, you start to pick up those tips, right? And when a DB plays in the league for a long time, he's just got this array of knowledge of like, how do I beat this specific guy? And, you know, that's just Tyrann Mathieu. And there's you watch him play, and I think you lose perspective on just how good he is at that. And you think like, oh, he's just in the right place at the right time. Well, a lot of times he's in the right place at the right time because he knew where to be and when. And that was the case in that first near interception. It was definitely the case on that second interception. And he almost overran it. You go back and watch it. Kirk actually, I think the first interception he missed because it was low. He didn't get there in time. So I think he maybe even jumped it a little faster, a little earlier than he did on the first one. And Kirk airmailed Drake London. And so the ball kind of caught him. Like he didn't really have to work for it. And thankfully this time, when a quarterback threw the ball directly at him, he caught it, unlike against the Broncos. But either way, that's point number 2. Appreciate Tyrann Mathieu while he's here. Because, that's the thing. You can go to a rookie safety. He's not making that play. He doesn't know that. He doesn't know that what Kirk Cousins likes to do once he gets through his progressions, and sometimes he'll get aggressive and go for a dig route rather than just check it down because that's what he does. Rookie players don't know that. Young players don't know that. That's a Tyrann Mathieu play. And only Tyrann Mathieu makes that play on the Saints. Anyway, okay. Speaking of DBs, my final point, Saints DBs, they're very close. They're very, very close. But they're just not there right now. And that's frustrating because, when a DB can make a play, can bat up a ball, he can intercept it, that's a game-changing type moment. And right now it just seems like the Saints are just right there, right on the cusp of making those game-changing plays. And a bit too frequently are those balls completed anyway. And so I went through film. I tweeted a few screen grabs. It's tough because you don't want to be angry when your defensive back is in perfect guarding position, is on the ball, has an arm outstretched, is just 2 inches away from the ball that sneaks through. That's what you want to do. That's where you need to be. And when you make life difficult on quarterback and receiver, more often than not, you're going to be better off for it, right? You don't want to allow easy completions. You want to make those completions difficult. Some quarterbacks are going to be better at lacing a ball in there. The term Darren Rizzi uses, painting the ball in there. And I asked Darren Rizzi about it, and this is what he said.
Yeah, well, the one thing that jumped out to me, I might have mentioned this earlier, is I really thought guys that had to step in like Shamar and like Ugo, man, they competed their butts off. They really did. That jumped off the film to me, was their high level of play. Now, they were in position a few times, and listen, sometimes you got to tip your hat to the opponent. I thought Kirk Cousins made about 4 or 5 phenomenal throws into really tight coverage from the pocket as he was getting hit. So sometimes you just got to say, man, great play for them. And so we had some guys well covered that he painted the ball in there. But listen, those guys also made some huge plays for us. So I would tell you that I really like the way they compete. We got to limit our penalties a little bit for sure in the secondary. I think we all know that. We're going to continue to compete at that high level. And listen, most of those 50-50 balls, they came down some of those last week. Those things will level out. So we just got to make sure we don't get frustrated with the process and maybe just finish a little better. That's kind of the focus for everybody right now, is the finish.
Yeah, and so I'd count 5 or 6 times throughout that game that the Saints were in perfect coverage, and the ball got completed anyway. And it's funny because it's that's where I want to be. But I think that's the next step for a guy like Alontae Taylor to be that Pro Bowl, all-pro caliber corner, is when you're in those positions, you have to make a play on the ball. And there's one to Darnell Mooney down by the goal line. There's one to Kyle Pitts on the sideline. These are big plays. You could make a very valid argument that Alontae Taylor not making a play when he was positioned to do so directly led to both Falcons touchdowns, because the first one, obviously, they get down to the goal line, and the Saints get 3 stops on the goal line, which that was impressive in and of itself. Then Bijan Robinson gets through on the 4th down. So that's, you allowed that catch. It didn't have to happen. Next, the other touchdown was the play to Kyle Pitts. And next play, Bijan Robinson breaks it off. And I'm not going to blame Alontae Taylor for Bijan breaking Will Harris's tackle. and then outrunning Tyrann Mathieu and Shemar Charles to the goal line. But should have never been in that situation because you make a play on that ball and he doesn't make that catch. It was a great catch by Kyle Pitts. But, that's where I am, right? And we'll see what Kool-Aid has to offer. I think Kool-Aid's going I think that's a young player thing is you're so worried about doing everything right that sometimes I think you forget, like, I got to make this play. And so that's what we'll see. And that's where I'm not going to tell you, these guys are bad, right? These guys can't get it done. I'm going to say that's where they need to improve. I saw someone be like, they should have benched Paulson Adebo because of this, because of that. Paulson Adebo is a starting cornerback on, 24, 25 rosters in the NFL. Like, Paulson Adebo is going to be better than a majority of CB2s in the NFL. The issue for the Saints was not starting Paulson Adebo. The issue for the Saints was, okay, he had a few too many penalties, but he also made plays. He also got turnovers. He made those plays in those contested moments, right? And that's why he would be starting on a majority of NFL rosters. And we'll see what happens to Paulson Adebo going forward. But either way, Shemar Charles, we'll see what happens with him. Kool-Aid McKinstry, we'll see what happens with him. Rico Payton, we'll see what happens with him. I'm hopeful that Kool-Aid McKinstry is back this week and Shemar can be a depth guy. And the guy that he deserves mention, and we haven't talked about him yet, Ugo Amadi. Like, Ugo Amadi, he just gets thrown into the slot. He wasn't even on the active roster to start the year. He was on the practice squad. He got called up. He got thrown into the slot. He was balling in that game, right? Like, he made 2 or 3 tackles behind the line of scrimmage that were just like, okay. He was in coverage a couple times. He didn't win every time. But, when it came down to it, he made plays. He forced incompletions, one-on-one in coverage twice on third down that forced a punt. He made the tackle to end the game. For a guy that is kind of overlooked on this roster, you got to give him a lot of credit. So, my point there, I don't really have a title for it. I just think, okay, the DBs are going to be all right. And we got to see them improve. But either way, that's it. And that's where we're going to wrap up this podcast. Hope y'all enjoyed it. We'll be coming back later in the week and get Steve Geller in here. Going to have a Browns reporter on to give us the lowdown on the fighting Jameis Winstons and what we can expect. Because I'm going to be honest, I don't know a ton about the Browns. I know they have Nick Chubb. I know they have Myles Garrett. I know they used to have Deshaun Watson. Now they have Jameis Winston. I know Jameis likes to chuck it and do a lot of stuff like that. I know Kevin Stefanski is a coach that I do not think is very good at being a head coach and probably should be fired. I know Joe Woods was the Browns defensive coordinator the last time the Saints played them. So all of these details lead to, I don't know, we'll figure it out. But we'll be doing that. We'll have that episode posting for you on Friday. Until then, you can catch up with all the latest news, notes, and analysis over at WWL.com. You can follow me at Jeff_Noack. You can follow Steve Geller at Steve Geller WWL. You can follow the show at Saints_pod. Remember to rate, subscribe, review, do all that good stuff. And if you have anything you'd like us to talk about, any questions, any comments, hit me up on Twitter. DMs are open. You can also leave a comment on the YouTube page. I try to look at all of those. Sometimes I'll miss them, though. So if you want to make sure I see what you're trying to say, make sure you can DM me on Twitter. You can email me. It's just my name at Audacy.com. So one way or another, we will get this thing sorted out. The second game of our 8-game winning streak coming at you on Sunday. Who dat? Go Saints. Be easy, y'all. Peace.